There was a pastor one time who went to visit a man who had stopped coming to church. The man's name was John, and the pastor hadn't seen him in a while, so he went to his house for a visit. And John greeted the pastor and welcomed him in, and he directed him to a chair beside the fireplace. And the pastor had been praying for the Lord to give him an opportunity to share about the necessity of being involved at the local church and not isolating yourself. And he had not come up with one, but when he sat down beside the fireplace, it dawned on the pastor the perfect way to begin engaging this man about why he needed to be at church. The pastor sat down. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed some of the tongs from the fireplace and grabbed one of the hot coals from the fire, and he set it out of the fire on the stone hearth. And both men watched as the coal went from orange to gray to just smoking because it was losing heat. And the fire roared on, but the coal that had been red hot just began to fizzle out. And as it gradually lost its color, it cooled off so much that it became cool to the touch. And the pastor picked up the coal, handed it to John, and neither man said a word, and then the pastor walked out. And John caught him before he got to his car, and he said, "I'll see you at church on Sunday." This really does give credence to Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, which says, "If two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not easily broken." And so this idea for the series called Together is because we really do believe that the Bible has tools that make relationships work. And as we've studied we've been very intentional about how we've started our series of studies here on Wednesday night and on Sunday morning. We've studied extensively the biblical worldview, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, understanding what God is doing. And then to even go a step further in doing the How to Read the Bible series, we've gone through every book of the Bible to show that when we talk about God bringing redemption and restoration into the world, we're not talking about something that we should talk about during a missions conference. You know, we're not talking about just evangelism. We're talking about the restoration of every area of life because Jesus redeems us and He overflows that redemption and restoration through us into our community, into our relationships, into our marriages, into our families, into all of these different areas. You've heard me say the Abraham Kuyper quote, "There's not one square inch in the whole domain of human existence as to which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry out, 'Mine.'" He is Lord of all. And we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen it from Genesis, where He created all things, to Revelation, where He restores all things. And we are living in that in-between time. Jesus has come, and now He has come to bring a restoration of God's purpose into our lives and into every area of our lives as we submit to Him. And so, because of that foundation that we've laid, now we can begin to jump into some of those topical issues about things that really are pressing to us as individuals. And so, where do we begin? If we have those things in mind, if we know what God's doing, where do we start with some of these topics? So as we look into creation, we see a verse in the very first chapter of Genesis that explains something to us about God. It's Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, when God says, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." So what we see in Genesis chapter 1, 26 is that God exists in a tri-unity. He is three persons in one God, a tri-unity. One God is love. Seem not to notice that those words have no real meaning unless God contains at least two persons. If God was a single person, then before the world was made, He was not love. They believe that the loving dynamic activity of love has been going on in God forever, as these different persons relate to one another in love. And he goes on to say, God is a dynamic, pulsating activity, a life, almost a kind of drama, almost, if you will not think of me irreverent, a kind of dance. The union between Father and the Son is such a live, concrete thing that this union itself is also a person known as the Holy Spirit. It is as if a sort of communal personality came to be known to us. And he says the whole dance or drama or pattern of this three-personal life is being played out in each one of us. Or putting it another way, each of us has got to enter that pattern, take his place in that dance, and there is no other way to the happiness for which we are made. You see, God wants us to enter into a relationship with him. And I think that's what it means to be made in the image of God. We were created for relationships. There's Genesis 1:26. We were created for relationships, but we were created for this relationship with God, but that's not it. We were also created for a relationship with our fellow human beings. We see this play itself out as Jesus sums up the entirety of the law and prophets of the Old Testament in Matthew 22:37 through 40, when he says, "And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." That's the relationship with God. "And this is the great and first commandment. But the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and prophets." And so, if Jesus sums up the great commandment as loving God and loving people, then shouldn't that inform us as to how we were created for these two crucial relationships? But jumping back to Genesis, in Genesis 2:18, we see that God admits this. I mean, he created the garden for Adam to dwell with him, didn't he? And yet in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, the Lord says, it's not good that man should be alone. And we know ultimately this refers to the marriage relationship, or immediately it refers to the marriage relationship, but it also refers to these relationships with other people. But what I want to persuade you of tonight, at the very beginning of this series, is that God created us for relationships that are purpose-driven. He created us for relationships that are purpose-driven. And so throughout this series, we want to fix our eyes on God's design for these relationships to be self-giving and not self-serving. We want to understand, how do we work through conflict? What is biblical forgiveness? And tonight we want to ask, where do I discover the most meaningful relationships? Where do I discover the most meaningful relationships as this biblical narrative of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration is playing out? And just because I forgot to announce it earlier, just so you know, we're starting this series tonight, but the next Wednesday night, because of the community-wide revival that's going on at Centerpoint, we're not having prayer meeting. We're not having a meal, and we are still having youth and kids and choir. But this group, as it traditionally meets, I would encourage y'all to go here. Bob Pittman, where invite me, I'll come. We can kind of play it out. Somewhere else to take our loving community into the community. So we'll continue on 2 weeks from tonight with the second part. And so tonight, as we talk about this first step of purpose-driven relationships, we want to understand that the main thought for tonight is, as we seek to run this race as Christ followers, we need friends who are Christ followers, who share a common foundation, and share a common commitment, and share a common culture. And what that's to say is we need a church family. We've got to have a church family if we want to walk with Jesus. And you say, well, Ryan, why do you start there and not with marriage? I mean, that's the immediate context of Genesis chapter 2. And I want to say this, while obviously marriage is God's design for many, it's not God's design for all. God calls many people to be single. Then there are some who, because of divorce, are being widows. Marriage is not a primary part of their life, but God-centered relationships exist in every season. They exist in every walk of life, and so that's why we're beginning here. There will be opportunity for us to get into marriage, and some of the things that we're going to talk about are easily transferable to marriage. But we want to begin with this idea of Christian friendship, relationship, fellowship, and this idea of needing a church family as we start this tonight. And so look at Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews is one of those mysterious books of the New Testament. We don't know the author. Even as we did the overview, we understand the purpose for his writing. We recognize that it's really a gospel tract to the Jewish people. And he talks about in Hebrews chapter 10 that the truth of Christ's person and work leads us to encouragement. It's an encouragement to draw near to God. And then he wants to give us exhortations against shrinking back from faith. And so in the immediate context in this passage, we're called to draw near. Because the priestly work of Christ has established this privilege of access to God, the author exhorts his readers to approach God faithfully and to firmly maintain their confession and to find ways to encourage others. And specifically in verse 22, it's kind of a three-point sermon, if you will. Verse 22, he talks about let us draw near to God. Verse 23, let us hold fast the confession. And verse 24, let us consider how to stir up one another. But let's begin in verse 23 here as we see him call. For he who promised is faithful. He who promised is faithful. Hold fast the confession means literally to hold down. It speaks here of a firm hold which masters that which is held. And when he comes to, we secure our own salvation. Okay, we don't need chapter 1 where he talks about make every effort to add to your faith, virtue, and virtue knowledge. He goes through that list. We recognize that we're called to hold fast to something as we come into this relationship with Jesus. And so here's the confession. It's that Jesus is Lord. That Jesus has a better rest and a better priesthood so that we can live in the true knowledge. You see, this is in John chapter 6, verses 38 and 39. He says, for I have that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. Philippians 1:6 says that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. He will hold us fast, as one of my favorite songs goes. And so because he holds us fast, the writer goes on to tell us the truth that we cling to as we hold fast to him. That's what that word for is for. He says we need to hold fast, for he who promised is faithful. Confident hope in God's promises, it stems from God's trustworthy character. The idea is not to follow any inclination that leads back to this old covenant or old way of life. In other ancient literature, the same Greek term is used of enduring torture. Persecution will come, but God is faithful. Temptations will abound, but God is faithful to provide an escape. God's promises are reliable, and with that confidence, the believer can persevere. And this is going to take us, this understanding of how this plays itself out is going to take us all the way back to the very first sermon series that we did here, where we talked about life in Christ. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. It says, his divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature. You see, the writer is about to point us to maintaining meaningful relationships within the context of a local church family. And so the power to pursue God-centered relationships in your life comes from the gospel's work within you. I never want you to be confused about the kind of Christianity that we're calling you to. And I say the kind because sadly, many people preach many different messages about how to walk in the Christian life. We are called to walk by faith at every level. You are never called to manufacture your own strength just to try to do something for God's glory. In fact, John 15 made it pretty clear that unless his words abide in us and we abide in him, we can do nothing of eternal benefit. And so you're not called to manufacture spiritual strength. You're called to put your roots down deep in what Jesus has already accomplished for you. And we recognize that as we abide in him, as we worship him, then the promises of God will fuel us, in this specific context, to live in community rather than live in isolation. And just a side note here, it's hard to live in close community with those who are pursuing a different mission than you're pursuing. And that's why we call this purpose-driven friendships. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or fellowship has light with darkness? You need to be very careful if the people closest to you are not walking with Jesus. And at the risk of sounding extremely narrow and potentially, if I misinterpreted, cultish here, we really do believe that it's not biblical for a believer to marry an unbeliever. A believer to have as the most influential person on their life an unbeliever. It's just like, if you're not walking towards the same goal, towards the same mission, then you need to understand the law of gravity works. We tell our kids this, right? We call it missionary dating. All right. Well, I've heard teenagers say, "Well, I'm gonna go out with this person and I'm gonna lead them to Jesus." Right? It was just the law of gravity. But the same goes for friendships. And the same goes for the people you spend the abundance of your time around in terms of influence, of fellowship. It's got to be purpose-driven. And for that reason, when we emphasize the idea of BFGs, and we emphasize the idea of community groups, and I'm preaching the choir here, we emphasize the necessity of Wednesday nights. We're not doing that because, like God's saying, okay, well, your attendance on Wednesday night was this, and therefore you get another jewel in your crown. I get no reward for you being here except seeing all of your beautiful faces, right? And praying that God's word would abound in us so that we can be pursuing a goal together. But when we talk about friendships or marriage or relationships, we really are saying that God wants us to have as the people closest to us, people that are walking the same path as us. And so, how do we live in community with other believers? As easy as anybody would make it sound, can I just give you a disclaimer that it's not easy? It's not easy to live in community with other believers. It's not going to be a cakewalk. Church membership is not going to be something that you glide into and 25 years later you say, oh, well, that went by so quickly. We've had all mountaintops and no valleys. I wish it was that way, okay? I mean, I really do. But I wouldn't be honest with you. And when I'm doing premarital counseling, I do believe with Jesus every year gets better, but in those years, you're going to have mountaintops and you're going to have deep valleys. And so we want to just come to it understanding this is why we must hold fast. If we want to hold fast to the confession without wavering, God's saying you need to walk in community with other believers. And so that's what verses 24 and 25 are about. It says, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you seek the day drawing near. And so the key to Christian relationships is to consider the nature of Christ. Once again, it's not to manufacture your own strength. The key to Christian relationships is to consider the nature of Christ. And you say, what do you mean by that, Ryan? Think about what Jesus has done for us in the gospel. He came near, he came to serve, and he operated out of a desire to give and not take. This is the key to creating the most meaningful relationships in your life. To draw near to people who are walking with Jesus, to serve in that context, and to operate out of a desire to give and not to take. And so he gives three action verbs as we think about what it means to be in Christian community. And that's stir up, meet up, and build up. Stir up, meet up, and build up. Okay? And so we'll go through these. Stir up. First of all, stir up means, you hear me use this language often. It means to fix your mind's eye on strategically thinking about something, to have attentive care. And so one literal translation is stimulate, right? Stimulate. Some of y'all live with pain in here. Have you ever used a TENS unit? Right? A TENS unit essentially, it's a little pad that connects to your muscle, and then it connects to a little electrode, and so it's horrifically involuntary, because as it shoots that electrical impulse, I mean, if you put it on the wrong spot, I mean, it's quite humorous, because you can't control it, right? And so we get the idea of what God is calling us to do in Christian community when He calls us to stimulate one another to love and good works. It means to incite someone to do something. It literally means to sharpen, right? Proverbs 27:17 says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." This same word for stir up or stimulate or sharpen was used in Acts chapter 17, verse 16, when Paul was in Athens and he was walking in the midst of the marketplace with all the idols, and his spirit was provoked. It was stimulated. It was stirred up by all of the idols. Now I'm going to tell you, this actually comes naturally, to want to stir up people. But I want to tell you that there's an opportunity for you to stir up things, but usually it's from the flesh. So how do you respond when you see someone's weakness? Do you seek to manipulate? Do you make fun of it? Proverbs 14:12 says there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. The writer of Hebrews literally says we should stir one another up to love, agape, and good works. And so what can I say or do in a person's life that will press them towards love? His life that can press them towards doing what's right, those good works. What can I do today to stimulate a brother or sister in Christ to Christ-like loving deeds? John Piper says the aim of our lives is not just loving and doing good deeds, but helping to stir up others to love and to do good deeds as well. This is why we gather together. I hope that's one thing you think about in coming on Wednesday night. As you see each other, as you come on Sunday morning, and you see people in your BFGs, or you go to community groups, or come to Sunday service, just to recognize that God is calling you to stir up one another to love and to good works. But the second action verb is to meet up. Stir up, meet up, build up. Meet up, he says, not neglecting to meet together. Collective and corporate worship is vital to Christians seeking to walk together and do life together. John Wesley said there's nothing more unchristian than a solitary Christian. You're not a lone ranger. I'm not a lone ranger. I can't do it on my own. In fact, I saw somebody post today a little quote on Facebook. It says, if you want to go somewhere fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go with friends. And in a church, it's the same way. We can go places fast, but if we want to go far, we got to do it together. It's going to take all of us. And can I encourage you? One reason not to neglect to meet together. You should always come here to worship the Lord and to stir up each other, to love and good works. But maybe one reason you need to be here is so that you can see who's not. You ever thought about that? These two friends, Ann and Debbie, were not Debbie Ashburn, but Ann and Debbie. They were friends who were mountain biking on a wilderness trail near Mission Viejo, California, when a 110-pound mountain lion sprang from the brush, pounced on Ann's back, and dragged her off by the head. Debbie screamed for help and grabbed her friend's legs, trying to free her and engaging in a desperate tug-of-war with the cat, while other cyclists threw rocks at the cat until it fled. And one of the guys who was helping her spoke to Nichols at the hospital, and she said she had some blood on her face. This is Debbie. She had some blood on her face, and she definitely showed signs of major struggle. She was shaking and trembling, and she just kept saying, I wasn't going to let go. I wasn't going to let go. Why weren't you going to let go, Debbie? Because that was her friend, and she wasn't going to let go of her. The tenacity of the cat was overcome by the faithfulness of her friends. And so maybe the reason that you need to be here is so that you can see who's not, and they need to hear your commitment not to let go of them. It's easy for us to, especially when we get consumed with numerical growth and things of that nature, but in reality, we need to be here because somebody else's walk with God will be spurred on as you see that they're not here and you make that call and you say those three words that are so simple and yet they mean so much. I miss you. Right? And so let us not forsake meeting together, as is the habit of some. But instead, let us stir up, meet up, and build up. Last one, build up. He tells us, but we need to meet up so that we can encourage one another. Encourage comes from the same word, get this, as John 14, the word that Jesus uses for the Holy Spirit. He is the Paraclete. And we are called to parakaleo each other. We're called to be paracletes to each other as well. Just like we're called little Christs. That's what Christians are. We're also not junior Holy Spirits. That has some negative connotations. But we're little Holy Spirits as we encourage one another. George Adams says encouragement is oxygen to the soul. And so when we encourage, we comfort. We warn. We strengthen. And notice in Hebrews, there is an eschatological urgency to the encouraging that requires an increased activity as the coming of Christ approaches. Jesus could come back, and so I need to encourage you. He wants that to be our thought process. Jesus could come back, and so I need to encourage you. I need to encourage you to be faithful. And so the people around you in your church family have needs that God has designed for you to meet. Don't neglect them. We're going to explore this more at length, but to build up typically involves words, doesn't it? Words are like building blocks with which we build into the lives of others. And that's what Ephesians 4:29 points us to when Paul says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up. Each one of those words of encouragement is like a building block in that person's life to fortify their spiritual strength. And so you have two options. You can corrupt, or you can build up. And so which one will you choose to do? We are a church family. In a world where families are broken, they should be able to find refuge and family within the church. Husbands and wives can serve alongside each other. Single folks can find people to do life with. Students see healthy friendships modeled. The child whose parents are divorced sees what godly men look like. And then, out of an overflow of healthy relationships, let us invite others to experience the same, because we are on this journey together. And that's the whole reason that we're here tonight, is because we all recognize that the people sitting around these tables, the people that we are covenant members, covenant church family with, we are walking together. And there's really no question about whether or not we should be committed to this. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was talking to his fellow framers, and after and I guess it was Benjamin Franklin. Anyway, it was one of those framers when they were coming up with the Declaration of Independence, and they all signed it. You know, John Hancock's large signature, so that the King of England could see it clearly without his glasses. You know, those bold men. They said, "Well, brothers, if we don't all hang together, we will most assuredly hang separately." And 2 Peter chapter 5 notes that the devil is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for people to devour. And if you know anything about wildlife, about predators, who do they always go for? The weak ones that are hanging behind the rest of the pack. And so that's why we've got to commit to stir up and meet up and build up. To not let anyone lag behind. To use those BFGs and those community groups as legitimate arms reaching around our church family to bring people in. And you need to know that that's why God put you here. Every one of us. It doesn't matter if your spiritual gift is encouragement or not. It doesn't matter if you feel comfortable calling other people or writing notes to other people or even talking to other people for that matter. Be strategic. Let the Lord stir you up as you spend time with Him in prayer about how to stir other people up. When's the last time you've done that? Have you ever gotten your BFG roll from your teacher and prayed for each person in there? Or maybe just write down the names of all the people who are on your roll and just pray for them? Have you ever said, you know what? I don't know if it's being done. I'm going to be the one that contacts them when they're gone. Little things like that make all the difference in the world. And so I want to encourage you to put this to practice. And let that be one of the ways that you respond in your BFGs this Sunday morning. And let us, in that way, truly become a church that tries to point people towards agape love. And I think we'll be better off for it.